Okay, I guess we could go ahead and get started.
All right.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Kamea Rigby from Peace Tech Lab, and it's an honor to be with you on the Road to Equal Justice in Boston today. Peace Tech Lab is a nonprofit-based organization in Washington, D.C., on the campus of the U.S. Institute of Peace. Our mission is to explore ways to use media, data, and technology to prevent violent conflict. Over the last 7 years, we've started accelerators, reality TV shows, radio dramas, and set up technology workshops all around the world, all designed to promote a more just and peaceful world. Today, you're taking part in one of Peace Tech Lab's newest programs called the Road to Equal Justice. This program is taking place in 16 cities across the United States and looks at the ways that technology tools and strategies can help social justice organizations. We have already made virtual workshops in Baltimore, Denver, and New Orleans. We had envisioned these workshops to be in person, and hopefully you can get back to that later this year. Today's training will focus on media and marketing strategies. We have a few social media professionals, including Generation Citizen, Ashley Reed, and Stephen Constant. They will be covering media relations, marketing, and content production for various platforms. We also have our last training next week on May 21st. We will be discussing digital security and how to protect your organization. So make sure to tune in this upcoming Friday, May 21st. The ACLU and Witness are some of the groups that will be presenting that day. With this workshop series, Peace Tech Lab is working to level the playing field for organizations working on social justice. Most nonprofits have an average just one person or less to run their technology. Technology training budgets for struggling nonprofits are about $640 per year on average, while budgets for leading nonprofits are over $5,700 per year. This is where we are trying to help with the series. With this program, we are looking to help you accelerate and scale your programs. Social media strategy tools for organizing and communicating, data collection and analysis, and media and storytelling techniques are just a few of the things you will learn with us for the next few weeks. Peace Tech Lab believe in the power and the local networks to solve local challenges. For Boston, that means using local experts as trainers to help you solve challenges. You'll see more of this as we go through this workshop today. We also believe in the power of low cost, easy to implement off-the-shelf tools. Many of you said that technology is too expensive or too hard to learn, so we want to show you free or cheap technology that is powerful and effective and doesn't take up too much of your time. We will also offer Boston organizations access to small grants to kickstart use of technology to help you accomplish your mission. Grants are only $2,000, but we hope they can jumpstart some new ideas for you. Before moving on, I would like to thank Tim at the Peace Tech Lab, who did a lot for this program and this session. I'd also like to thank our partners at Hogan Lovells, who helped us with putting this workshop series together. As you can see, we are using Zoom webinar today, so please raise your hand if you have any questions throughout the day. Also, put your questions to the speaker and we can make sure they're all answered for you. Our first session today features Generation Citizen from Boston. They plan on presenting their work in youth empowerment and social media advocacy. I'd like to hand over the mic to Courtney Caruso now. She is a senior associate from our wonderful partner, Hogan Lovells, here in Boston. She's focused on white-collar criminal defense, government enforcement actions, and internal investigations. Good morning, Courtney. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you for that nice introduction and welcome everyone. I'm very excited to introduce you to Generation Citizen and specifically Keith Chappell and Brandon Klugman, who are going to be speaking with you this morning. They have quite a few lessons that they've learned over the years that they're excited to share. And so just before we get started, let me tell you a little bit about Generation Citizen. I've actually been on the board of GC since 2014. It is a phenomenal organization that is transforming how civics education is taught by bringing the subject to life in Massachusetts classrooms, but actually all around the country. And recently the Massachusetts and Rhode Island sites merged. So we have a Generation Citizen New England, which is great. We're growing and getting bigger and stronger each year. So GC really champions real world democracy education in the classroom that equips all young people with the skills and knowledge needed to understand systems of oppression and affect change. The idea is that, like anything else, we actually do need to learn how to participate in democracy. It's not something you can take for granted. There are skills associated with it, and we should be teaching those to our youth. So GC trains and supports classroom teachers to deliver an action-oriented civics curriculum, and then also pushes for change on a systemic level by leading advocacy efforts to increase state funding for civics education. In addition, GC runs the Vote 16 USA initiative, which is a hub for youth-led advocacy to lower the voting age on the local level. So Generation Citizen uses media relations as an important and very critical tool to advance its advocacy work, spread awareness, and just grow its mission. And Keith Chappell is here as a program manager on the GC New England team. And he also leads the Massachusetts Civic Learning Coalition, in addition to working with classroom teachers. And Brandon Klugman leads the National Vote 16 USA initiative, which supports GC's other organizational policy and advocacy work. So I'd like to welcome you both and hand it over to you for a presentation. If anyone has questions as we go, feel free to put those in the chat or put them in the Q&A. I will monitor, and at the end, after Brandon and Keith present, we can circle back and make sure all those questions get answered. So thank you both.
All right, thank you, Courtney, for that great introduction. Take time for Brandon to pull up the slides here.
All right, there we go.
All right, great. Again, Keith Chappell, we'll have our email addresses again at the end of this session. All right, so we're going to do a warm up in the chat. And so first question is something that I've used during professional development with the teachers that I work with. And so it's, if you were a potato, what kind would you be? And so usually get quite a bit of different responses, but I think the one that I'd be, and I had it last night, was Papas Rayanus. Not sure if any of you know what that is, but I'll put it in the chat. It's delicious. I had some last night. Okay, got some go. Oh, purple. Great potato. Oh, Japanese sweet potatoes. I'll have to check those out. And then sweet potato fries. Always a good one. All right, and then this next question. Have you ever pitched a news story to a reporter? We got a yes from, okay, a couple yeses, a couple no's. All right, you want to hit the next one? And have you ever been interviewed by a media outlet or helped someone else prepare for a media interview? All right, got a lot more yeses on here. Pretty good. And this last one, have you ever written an op-ed? And so it could either be you're an author of an op-ed or a ghostwriter an op-ed. Either one counts. No? Okay. A couple of no's and yeses. All right, so pretty good responses from everybody. Go ahead and dive in here, lay out the plan for the session. So the things that we're going to cover, what is media relations and why does it matter? And then we're going to talk about 4 examples that Brandon and I, that we've worked on. So pitching news stories, inbound media requests, op-eds, and editorial board endorsements. And then also discussing how to integrate media relations into a larger communication strategy. All right, and so for this first part, so media relations, there's always a need to communicate your message to your audience through media outlets. And so the way that we'll talk about it for today is through earned media, so pitching stories, and then we'll talk about the social media aspect of it too. And the why. So why does it matter? One, it helps build credibility, and it makes things easier to share out. And with Generation Citizen, if you're like us and having to meet with legislators, whether it's on Vote 16 or talking about civics education, it's always a nice thing to put into a legislative packet, like here's our article in a local paper or an article that was covered by the Globe. It helps you reach new audiences, so people that may not follow you on social media, but still read either Boston Globe or, since Brandon and I are based in the Boston area, or local media outlets. Stimulate new interests, so part of that reaching new audience, and then building demand for new ideas. So I know Brandon, this has happened to him before, but people read the article on Vote 16 and then send him resources to help him with Vote 16 efforts. And so with this first example, it's one that was talked about with Chris, the author of this article, at the State House News Service in Boston, Massachusetts. And so this was about Vote 16, so published in 2019. Chris talked to a couple of students and about how Vote 16 is a complement to civics education. So a couple things on here that made the story and the pitch a success is using proactive personal outreach. So instead of sending a press release or media advisories, which don't always do the trick, I know there was personal outreach to Chris. So sending him an email, letting him know that the story, or there was going to be a story, and making it easy for him to cover it. And another thing that made this great was the students that were interviewed for this story. They know that they were the ones who were gonna speak, and then they practiced the key messages. And Brandon, I don't know if you want to go back to the slide before, but a lot of times your headline, or I don't want to say a lot of the time, sometimes a headline won't match the message that you want to get out. But this headline didn't happen by coincidence. The students had their message and they had it prepared, and then they drove this message home, which resulted into this headline. The bill pitched as complement to civics ed. That was one of the key pieces that they talked about. And then afterwards, and we'll talk more about this at the end, with it being published, it's always about leveraging, and pushing it out. So emailing it, sharing with key supporters, with people in networks, and Generation Citizen with board members, sharing it out on social media, and getting organizations and students within our network to share it out on their social media, and then personal correspondence, sending emails, hey, did you see this article? It's a great way to get into the door of people that make key decisions or are part of decision-making process. And we'll come back to this towards the end.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Keith. So I'm going to share a little bit about another example. So we just heard about an example of a time when we actively pitched a story, right? Like we reached out to reporters and requested or suggested that they cover an activity that we were leading. This next one is an example of an inbound request that we received and then took advantage of. And it's actually a TV, as you can tell, a screenshot here, that's me. It's an example of coverage on TV, which is a little bit different as well. And so, as you can see, it's a short interview that on the local CBS Boston news segment. And this is a little bit of the story of how it happened and the strategies that we executed to make the most out of this opportunity. First and foremost, we had to know that this kind of inbound opportunity could be coming up, and then be ready for that. And so there are two main ways that we kind of made sure that we were ready. Number one, along with the coalition of people who we were working with, on this campaign, right? So we were involved in a larger campaign to advance a bill to lower or to allow cities to lower the voting age. We're also supporting students in a variety of cities and towns advocate for that policy in their city councils and town meetings. So just with a lot of that kind of activity going on, and with our organization being the central hub connecting all that activity, we knew that it was not out of the question for us to maybe receive an email from a print reporter or from a TV producer requesting us to speak with them about the topic. And so because we knew it could come up, we had ahead of time talked with our coalition partners about how we would respond to that opportunity if it did come up, including talking about who the different spokespeople would be for different kinds of requests. And so in this situation, we had already established with our allies that, if this specific type of request came up, that I would be a spokesperson to respond. And so when the situation came up, we didn't have to spend 2 days going back and forth, convening a meeting, saying, how should we handle this? We already knew how we would take it, and we were able to respond immediately that afternoon. And then, of course, like Keith mentioned on the previous example too, we had spokespeople who were prepared ahead of time, who didn't wait until we got that request to do some practice, but who had practiced throughout the whole year to be ready for opportunities like this. The other thing that I'll mention on this example is that we took advantage of a specific opportunity to shape a larger message. So what happened here was the specific focus of the news segment was on a vote that was happening in one town meeting that week, right? That was the Newsly PEG, was one town meeting vote that week. But during the course of the interview, I took advantage of that opportunity to share a message, a larger, broader message about this movement that we're building. And that's kind of a win-win for everyone, because it sort of answers a question that the reporter might not even know to ask about, what's the larger context on this, or how does it relate to the bigger picture of what we're trying to accomplish and the change that we're kind of seeing in society. So we didn't allow ourselves to just be limited to the narrow single town that they were initially interested in. And then lastly, we'll share just a couple tips specific to TV, because this is a TV example, which is obviously a little bit unique from print media. So number one, it's to actually practice with a camera. It's something that can feel awkward at first, but is so worth doing. Sitting down with a friend or a colleague, which is what I did in this situation, and setting up the cell phone to record some practice interview questions, and then to actually watch it back on the screen. Again, a little awkward sometimes, but very worth doing, to notice any sort of body language or tone of voice stuff that you might want to adjust, because the reality is when you're on TV, it's a lot more than the words you say that ends up influencing the impression that viewers get. And then lastly, the other kind of specific tip for TV that we really relied on in this situation was knowing what we're walking into. And so ahead of time, we asked about 1 million questions of the producer. We asked, is this going to be broadcast live, or is this something that you're recording and then editing? That's probably the most important. Also asked, who is the anchor who's going to be asking the questions, right? Because they're not the one who actually emails to do all the coordinating. And then a couple other questions to make sure that we knew exactly what we were walking into. Now I'll toss it back to Keith to talk about op-eds.
Perfect. This is probably one of my favorite op-eds that I worked on so far. And so this op-ed, it's about civic education and the context around this one. So last year, back in, October, we were advocating for funding for civic education in Massachusetts. And it didn't look like there was going to be funding allocated for FY20 by the State House and State Senate. And so we did a couple of things, including this op-ed. And so the authors here are Michael Neagle and Elaine Santelman. So they're Michael Neagle, he's a 2019 History Teacher of the Year in Massachusetts, and Elaine Santelman is his district admin. And so you can go ahead and hit the next slide, Brandon. But one of the reasons part of that process, the writing that we included, both teacher and admin, is that we wanted both of their perspectives, because it was very valuable to have the classroom story on how it happens at like a micro level and then that district macro level. And so including those two different perspectives, pushing for civics education, definitely made a difference. And we also shared that with some of our advocacy materials and also social media. But with this process and writing this op-ed, so I helped write this op-ed. And so it's also knowing the capacity of people that you're asking to write an op-ed for. So I came up with a framework, foundation for it, filled in some pieces, and then we had a process of going back and forth. Does this look right? Is this what you want to say? That happened about 3 times. And then the pitching part, we really want to pitch it to one place at a time. So that way it's not being published or accepted at different outlets. And we don't want to make the people that we have relationships with in media mad at us. And so we pitched this one to the Commonwealth first, and then let it sit. My executive director, Ariel Jennings, sent an email over to Bruce, who's the editor at Commonwealth. And in that pitch, it was basically including the hook. And so with the op-ed, the hook was around civics education and funding and the need for it to be funded. It was also wrapped around in the bigger pieces of elections and highlighting the importance of civics education for students, especially during this time. And so wrapping it all in there, and then that pitch including like a 2-sentence summary of what the story is about, and then also thanking Bruce for running some pieces before on civics education. And so sometimes when you're sending a pitch to an editor, you might not hear back immediately, or you might not hear back at all, and then you'll come across and see that it's published. So that's another thing you want to watch out for before you send a pitch to another place. Just you could either set a Google alert or do a Google search to make sure it wasn't published before sending it out. But yeah, this next part, making it stand out. So make sure it's relevant. If it can tie into something else that's going on, that's perfect and a more organic hook. And then again, thinking about the author. So for this piece, we knew that educators have a strong voice, and people will listen to educators who are teaching civics education. And then generate light or heat. So this is a good example that Brandon shared with me. So with op-eds, the generate light part is shedding light on something new. So your op-ed could either do that, present a new idea, or generate heat. And this piece in particular, I'd say it generated heat in a polite way, highlighting the importance and the need to move on funding for civics education. So just to go over that piece again, with op-eds, you want them to do like one of 2 things: shed light on new ideas, bring up something new, or call people to action and take action on something you care about. And the backup plan. So of course, it's never guaranteed that your op-ed will be published. And so for the case with the Massachusetts Civic Learning Coalition, we have a website and we have places of where we publish blogs. And so the backup plan here, if it wasn't published, was to publish it on our blog, on our website, and then share that out within our network. We have a listserv with educators, different people that follow our work, and share that out too that way. And if you don't have a website or something like that, definitely connecting with partners who could share it on your behalf on their website or whatever platform they have is always a good idea. And kick it over to you, Brandon.
All right, thanks so much. So the last example that we'll share is an example of an editorial piece where we engaged with the editorial board. And I guess it's a natural transition because the op-ed refers to in the old school newspapers what is opposite of the editorial. So now we'll flip, I guess, to the other side of that page, to the editorial itself. And so this is kind of a more unique, but I think a really interesting example of leveraging the media to advance our aims. And I will say it's the one example where I think some of the strategies and lessons are at least kind of one size fits all and most unique to the situation. But with that in mind, I hope this is still interesting and helpful. The example you see here, published a little over a year ago in the Boston Globe, the editorial supports our work to extend voting rights to 16 and 17-year-olds on the local level. An editorial, as you might know, is a piece that is not written or signed by an individual person. It's written by, as it says, the editorial board. And so it is the voice of the editorial board of the publication. And it's important to remember that editorial boards of publications are entirely separate from the news gathering side of those publications. So they're not influenced by or collaborating with reporters who are writing news stories. It's a separate activity. And they're not speaking for those reporters who are gathering news. They're speaking for the individuals who make up the editorial board. Anyways, this is kind of the story of how this happened and some lessons that we took away from it. We knew from talking with allies who had advocated for other issues that for this publication in particular, the Boston Globe, that the editorial board did have a practice of sometimes meeting with groups of people who wanted to encourage them to write an editorial about a certain topic. And so we knew it was possible to get a meeting if we played our cards right. The first thing we did was made sure we were trying to do this at the right time. I think we've mentioned in every single one of these examples that timeliness really matters a lot. So in this situation, you saw that the piece was published in early March. There was a deadline later that month for the bill that our coalition was advocating for to get out of its committee in the state legislature later that month. And so we started reaching out, several weeks ahead, but with that deadline in mind, telling them this is why this matters now. And then the second thing that we did was worked our connections to get in the door. We reached out through a number of different ways. One of the activists who's part of our coalition had previously been interviewed by a columnist for a story on the kind of opinion section. So they reached out to that columnist and said, hey, I'd love to connect with the editorial board. Can you help me out? At the same time, we had a state legislator who had kind of a very loose connection with one of the editorial board members, reach out to her with the same kind of message, hey, we'd love to talk. And then we also reached out just directly to the editorial page editor, the person who kind of oversees that whole process, with a more cold pitch. And those three things together, I guess, got enough attention that they eventually responded and said, hey, we see you all have been reaching out and we would love to learn more, and got in the door for a meeting, which was something that we were proud of in and of itself. And then once we were in the door, we had to figure out how to take advantage of that opportunity to make the case. So we prepared for this like you'd prepare for any other intense job interview, intense interview for maybe a grant opportunity, or any other situation like that. The first thing we thought of was who should be there. They offered us the opportunity to have multiple people join in a meeting. And so we were very thoughtful about, who that should be. And then we just prepared really as intensely as we could. That included reading all of the previous editorials from the past few months to get a sense for what kind of arguments this group usually like to put forward. One of the things we noticed was that in almost all the pieces, when they could, they included some kind of data-driven argument. And so we made sure that we were ready to talk about how the data backs up our idea here. We also did research on each member of the editorial board. They're listed online. And then we put together kind of like a dossier that goes through, each person's background, the most recent articles that person's written as an individual, and then any other kind of takeaways that we were able to find to know exactly who we're going to be in the room with, because it was a situation where all the people in the room, most of us had never met any of them. So we wanted to kind of know who we were going to be across the table from. And then, of course, we prepared with our group to make sure our roles were clear, who's going to answer what types of questions, who's going to share this first, who's going to share that next, and went into the meeting really confident that we are going to make a strong case and present ourselves well. And then the last thing, we did the meeting. It went really well. We were lucky that when we walked out of the meeting, a few of the folks told us, that they had no idea what to expect, or they were a little skeptical walking in, but wanted to just give us the chance to be heard. And then walking out, they were actually really interested and compelled. And so we left feeling confident, and our confidence was kind of, it was rightfully placed, because about a week and a half later, they published the piece that I shared the screenshot of, encouraging the legislature to pass the bill we were working on, supporting the idea of a lower voting age for local elections. And then we had to leverage it as best as we could. And key to that was kind of understanding, how this editorial board and this publication fits into the larger political landscape, or kind of even larger societal landscape that we were operating in. For example, as a nonprofit, we're always fundraising, and we knew there were a number of funders who we're trying to get money from, who would really respect this a lot. And so one of the first things we did was email it directly, personally, to some of those key funders, saying, I want to make sure you saw this. And a lot of them were pretty excited about it. We did the same thing to figure out how to best take advantage of it for a kind of political advocacy objectives, to make sure that we got as much out of it as we could. And all that said, you can plan as much as you want, and sometimes the world still gets in the way. You might have noticed the date on that piece, I think, was March 9, 2020. So less than a week later, the world had kind of changed with the first wave of COVID lockdowns and everything else. So I think just good to remember, despite our best efforts, sometimes the world gets in the way and we have to adapt, which we did as best as we could to still make the most out of this opportunity. So with that, I'll toss it back to Keith.
And can I maybe interrupt you both for a second just to pose 2 questions that have come up in the chat before you get to your final?
Yeah, that would be great. Yeah, thanks.
Okay, great. So we have one from Samantha about whether you use a template when you do interviews, or if you just customize based on the type of media and the outlet you're connecting with.
So I'll start, and then Keith, you can add if you have more. I think to prepare for media interviews, we have one standard, or at least when I do it for the Vote 16 work, there's one standard, you could call it a template that we use to prepare. It's something called a message triangle that you might have heard of, and I can share it with folks who are interested. It's a visual aid that helps you organize your thoughts and helps you practice making a core point supported by supporting points that all make sense in a coherent way. And so we use that as the base when we're preparing for any sort of type of interview. But then obviously do different sorts of actual practice. And so if we're practicing with someone who's going to be interviewed by a print media, we might do that practice over the phone, because the real thing will be over the phone. Whereas if they're going to be on TV or on the radio, we'll do a practice where we actually record it, so that they can get used to the situation that they'll be in real life.
I've never heard of that, so I'll have to look that up. So also we have a question from April about, for proactive outreach, do you use a list of media contacts for Boston, or does it just seem like things change so often that you kind of have to keep doing that research?
It changes, I guess, both. I mean, we keep a list, but have to update it all the time. And so we'll look at the list, but we'll be careful to double check that everyone we're reaching out to is still working at wherever they are listed as in the list. So it is a constant battle to make sure we have the most recent information and a list that's actually up to date.
Perfect. Okay, sorry to interrupt. Just want to make sure we got our audience questions taken care of.
And feel free, if more questions are coming up for you, to put it in here. So this last piece, how does all of this fit into a larger strategy? So a lot of the things that we think about as we're writing a piece, and specifically for that op-ed, is coming up with a plan to share it. So like I said, we had that backup plan just in case it wasn't published, but this plan, social media plan that we had, would work regardless of whether it's not published and put on the blog. So with social media, you're looking at different audiences. So the earned media reaches people that don't follow your work or aren't aware of you. And so with social media, sometimes it does reach people that are new, but a lot of it are people who have actively clicked follow or like or something on your page. And so it's also good for engaging current stakeholders and getting them involved in sharing the message and retweeting or sharing things on social media. But with earned media, you're definitely reaching new people. And with the social media aspect of it too, to make it easier, is creating a toolkit for partners. So I know with a lot of the things that we've talked about, we've created toolkits for people of whether it's sample tweets that they can use to post on their accounts, Facebook posts. I know sometimes there are things used for LinkedIn, but the toolkits are always easier. The best that you make it of where it's a copy paste type of thing, it's so much easier for people. And you get a lot less questions based on like, how do I put this on Twitter and stuff? And with the content production, so part of that toolkit for partners, visuals and data. So with that op-ed with Mike Neagle and Elaine Santwin and a couple other pieces, we paired tweets or Facebook posts with visuals. And so I believe the visuals illustrate some of the data points that we shared. One thing that we've noticed and that we've been taught through different developments and webinars is that each time you can pair your story with a visual data point, the more or the chances of that person or somebody scrolling through social media to stop increases a ton. And so it doesn't have to be anything fancy. I believe we use Canva a lot. And so using Canva to create materials and things for not only social media, but flyers for events and things like that. And this last piece on influence. So at the end of the day, earned media builds credibility. It's often one of the fastest ways to build credibility with a large audience, and it gives natural networking hooks. So a lot of the times when something's published, we'll send that out to our network and to also people who are a couple degrees removed from our network. So for things related to advocacy with Massachusetts Civic Learning Coalition, it's sending a message to a key decision maker and saying, hey, I just want to make sure you've seen this. And then having that open up to different opportunities, whether it's for a meeting between with the Civics Learning Coalition, teachers and educators, and setting other things up like that. And then Brandon, want to kick it back over to you, make sure you want to add anything that I missed.
I think that's perfect. Thanks so much. We'll close out here. These are a couple of images of students engaging in media relations in our work. Here's a student being interviewed by a local news outlet, and then a screenshot of another piece that we participated in. Take a screenshot if you want to email us. We're happy to email and can share more resources like the message triangle if you're interested. And then yeah, if we have time for questions, would love to answer any that folks are thinking about.
So I thank you both. This has been tremendous. I think one question, looks like we have 3 minutes left. So maybe one thing we could end with is, GC started as a very small organization. I remember when I first joined the board, the board was helping with was very much a working board, and has evolved out of that as GC has grown and the staff has grown and your teams have grown. So I'm wondering, for organizations that feel like I don't have a comms team, I don't have the resources to put somebody on a media outreach plan, how can they think about who is responsible for this and how to grow it despite not necessarily having the resources to just have a dedicated, marketing or media or comms person on staff?
That is a great question. I think we talk about media in a way that can make it sometimes sound like it takes more expertise or effort than it really does. Like at the end of the day, we grew our credibility by getting media coverage in those early days of GC by taking 20 minutes to think of a reporter who we've kind of read articles from. Like we remember like, oh, I read an article about this like education topic a few weeks ago. Then we look back, oh, who was that reporter who wrote it? And then find their email and write them a 3-sentence email about an upcoming event or about a project that we're working on that we know is newsworthy. Doesn't take any expertise or special kind of skills or knowledge to do that. And then that, resulted in coverage for us, especially in the local level. Those local outlets are just so accessible and have zero barrier to reaching out, and doesn't even take that much time. So yeah, I would encourage folks to not think that this needs to be scary or professional in any way at all.
Yeah, and one thing I'll add there too, because with previous work before Generation Citizen is really leveraging your local media outlets, because the people who read like your local papers, you'll definitely get some responses from them. I've had a couple people where they read something in local media and then want to get involved. And so it's also easier to get published in local media than like a statewide newspaper too.
Well, thank you both. This was great. For those who are watching, feel free to reach out to Keith or Brandon or me if you have any questions. And I will turn it back over to Tim or Ashley, whoever is up next.
Yeah, thank you, Courtney, and thanks to Brandon and Keith for that great presentation. Really appreciate you guys coming on today and showing what you've been up to, and I think it's really helpful for the organizations we have here. So I'm going to turn it back over to Kamei, and she's going to introduce our next speaker, Ashley, and we'll go from there. Thank you.
Okay, everyone. So next up, we have Ashley Reed, a social media strategist and an empathetic marketer. She'll be giving a presentation on social media strategies for activists so organizations and individuals can connect with their audiences and achieve their organizational objectives. The floor is yours.
Thank you. I'm just going to try to share my screen real quick. Are you seeing my slides?
Yep, we can see it just fine.
Amazing. Okay. So good morning, everybody, everyone in Boston. I am Ashley. I'm your speaker for today. By day, I work as a social media consultant for Hootsuite, which is like a social media relationship platform. A little bit about myself. So I've lived, studied, worked across 3 continents. So I really consider myself a global citizen. And I think that status has really helps me become a more empathetic marketer. And I try to help my clients get smarter about the strategies that they employ on social when they're trying to connect with their audience and achieve their organizational objectives. And by night, I like to think of myself as a reality television fanatic. Like, don't get me started on the Real Housewives drama. I will not end my session today. And I'm very excited to be joining all of you guys today. Hopefully at the end of the session, you'll walk away with some lofty goals and some realistic first steps for how you want to achieve, approach social as a social justice organization. So let's dive in, starting with what is social activism. So social media activism is a form of protest or advocacy for a cause that uses social media channels, right? And because hashtags generally play a pivotal role in like mobilizing these movements, we often see it interchanged with the term hashtag activism. So you probably have heard of both. Okay, so I want this session to be interactive. So I do have a couple of questions for you in the presentation, and this is the first. And you can just, this is by Slido. So you could either use the barcode or you could go to slido.com and enter that 6-digit number. And the question that I want to ask you is, do you know what the first social activism movement was to start the ball rolling? Like, which one was the first of its kind? Was it the California immigration protests? Was it Colombia's last FARC protests? Was it Black Lives Matter, Occupy Wall Street, or was it the Arab Spring protests? And I'll give you guys a couple of seconds to answer. I see some people thinking that it's Occupy Wall Street. I see a vote for the California oh, there's Arab Spring. Okay, I see a little movement here. Oh, a lot of people seem to think it's Occupy Wall Street. Okay. Well, it is actually the California immigration protests. You know, in late March 2006, I think a couple of high school students in the Los Angeles areas, they used text messaging to organize a classroom walkout because they were opposed to some changes in like the proposed law, the immigration law. And the students then reached out to other teens in like the California Central Valley area on MySpace. That's what it was. And it inspired another 1,000 students in Fresno to walk out. And this was the pioneer for the phenomenon that we now know as social activism today. But does this even work? Like, let's talk about some of the critiques for this type of social media involvement. And I've heard all of them. So slacktivism is a term that combines the word slacker and activism, right? And so it describes like the rudimentary actions that on digital platforms that you use to support an issue. And oftentimes it involves little to no effort on the part of the participant. And when they speak about this, they usually are talking about like signing online petitions or copying social media statuses. The mindset of the critic is, okay, these petitions, sure, you have tens of thousands, you gather them quickly, all right, but they're not effective in swaying like an elected representative's vote, and crowd of in the flesh constituents is much more likely to do so. In a sense, they believe that social activism is merely like for the participants' gratification and clout, because it lacks engagement and commitment, and it fails to produce any tangible effects in terms of promoting a cause. And an example of slacktivism or the perception of slacktivism rather, that comes to mind is Starbucks' Race Together campaign. I don't know if you guys remember it, but it received so much public backlash and mockery because, you know, many people thought it was insincere or what have you. But, you know, for those of us who need a reminder, this whole thing, Starbucks wanted to spark discussion about the topic of race following the death of Michael Brown and Eric Gardner, two unarmed Black men that were killed by police. And they said that their baristas were going to be writing #RaceTogether on cups, and they were going to be engaging in a discussion around race relations with anybody who asked about it. And so a lot of people thought, this is misguided. How can you have like a meaningful conversation about race at a Starbucks counter? And other people were like, this is just like a opportunistic marketing ploy, right? Listen to me, there was so much negativity on Twitter that their senior vice president of global communications had to leave the platform. He had to peace. So, you know, we've seen greenwashing, woke washing, all these kinds of washing But I'm wondering, what do you think, or rather, how do you think most people perceive social media activism? Do they think it moves the needle, or do they think it doesn't make a difference? What is the pulse in the room? Okay, we have one from it moves the needle, one for it doesn't make a difference. I'm giving you a couple more seconds just to answer. Ooh, wow. It doesn't make a difference in leading. Well, truth is, there are various perceptions of hashtag activism. So you're all right. So there's 64% of Americans that say, okay, social media does help give a voice to underrepresented groups, but that doesn't mean that they think that speaking out is effective. Like, on the contrary, 71% of people are skeptics. And this very large subset of people agree that social media makes people believe that they're making a difference when they're really not. So for popular movements like Black Lives Matter, where there's a lot of performative allyship, while the burden of proof is still on these individuals and these companies that are trying to involve themselves in the discussion, I think nonprofit organizations can issue clear directives that can help them showcase their authenticity. Some people just do not know where to start. Where do I start? So I'll speak a little bit more on that a little later. But are the critiques valid? I personally do not think so. I think the slacktivism critique is a very short-sighted view of the whole situation, just because of all of the benefits that social activism has. What benefits, you ask? Well, the first benefit that I want to highlight is obviously social allows you to express your experiences and your opinions, but it also brings a lot of eyeballs on the issues in question, and just because of the user base of these platforms, those eyeballs could belong to authorities, ministries, politicians, what have you. And so these are people who ordinarily would have been a little bit more difficult to reach. So that's benefit number one. Benefit number two is this thing called vigilantism, which is very similar to vigilantism. And it's where, on social, where you have like a perceived transgression, they're usually exposed and publicly sanctioned. And so social is a place where you're held accountable. People are also able to involve those people outside of their community to collectively negotiate new shared realities. And what I mean by that is it can really empower communities. I don't know if you guys remember the Free the Nipple movement, right? That was supposed to you're supposed to post topless photos, and it was supposed to normalize unsexualized representation of the female torso. And that's basically, I think, the best explanation of this benefit, where feminists have their viewpoint and they're trying to negotiate what is and is not acceptable to the wider public, and reclaim, in a sense, the female body. Another benefit is there are studies that show that small online actions can actually ease people into more bigger offline action. And that's because oftentimes online activism, it's a breed, it cultivates the psychological preconditions, I would say, for individuals to be more likely to embrace offline protests. And by that I mean you have these circles of tightly knit social identities that are fostered through online interest alignment. And when you have morality and solidarity, self-efficacy and unfairness, it's just a breeding ground for people just wanting to take direct action. Then lastly, we have interpersonal mobilization, or we could call it by its scientific name, which is FOMO. And that's where, people, when they're speaking about an online issue, you want to get involved in a conversation too. You don't want to get left out. So that is the end goal. But for so many of us, we're at ground zero. So we're going to shift gears right now, and we're going to speak to how you can get your accounts off the ground, what you need to do to grow your followers, what you need to post, that sort of thing. Okay, so if you are going to be engaging your audience effectively, then I feel like you need to know what sort of party you're throwing and who you're going to invite to your party. For me, this right here is a really easy way to visualize what the networks are used for and what their different purposes are. And I'm curious, if you want to plug it in the chat, what platform are you currently using and what do you like to post? I would like to know. So for example, we have LinkedIn, and that's more of like a professional networking and connection building site. And you would post thought leadership and industry trends there. Twitter is a little more, you put in the moment content there, think like breaking news, live events, and like timely relevant updates. Facebook is when you want to share like interesting stories in a relevant and casual way. Instagram, I would say, is the same thing, but it's more curated and it's more visual. So images are the star of the show for Instagram. And I wanted to include this handy little cheat sheet on the differentiators between the social networks. If this is useful for you, just take a screenshot, take out your phone, snap a picture. This table just looks at the ideal length of a post, the ideal number of hashtags, the ideal number of times you should be posting per week on the different platforms. Of course, these are guidelines. Social media is creative. It's not really black and white. Rules are malleable. And I'd love to know in the comments how often you're currently posting per week. That's a question that I often get from my clients is how often does my audience want to hear from me? And I don't know if you noticed, but regular posting actually drives audience growth and engagement. So you would want to focus on like building a regular cadence and like aiming for 2 posts per week at the start, maybe. And let me tell you why it's critically important. Because you can grow your followers 2 times faster by just posting every single week consistently, compared to like those who post less than once a week. And then when you build like the capacity, you can you can begin to post more. And I often see my most successful clients posting at least once a day. And there was an analysis done by this company called Tailwind, where they found that daily posting grows followers 4 times faster than if you're posting once a week. And that makes sense just because like you're getting more visibility. It is also worth noting that there is such a thing as too much sharing. And it would be remiss of me to not mention this. So basically when you share too much, the quality will inevitably go down. I think often people suspect that you're a bot or something, but, and that's not ideal when you're trying to like humanize your brand. So in moderation, posting at a consistent rate keeps your content top of mind, and it gives your audience more opportunities to see your content. A big challenge is knowing what to post, but that's something that we're going to be covering in a couple of slides. Let me just check out the chat real quick. Okay, I see a lot of people saying that they post 4 to 5 times a week, 2 to 3, at least two times a day. Interesting. How much is too much? When you notice a dip in your engagement, that is too much. So I would say use a data-driven approach, but also just follow the table that I had outlined. Why do you think followers rise? Is it about timing and trying to be seen? I think it's a mix of having engaging content and being able to play the algorithm game. I know on Instagram, you have like 3 primary ranking signals: interest, timeliness, and relevance. And so you just have to know what these platforms want from you. And I can leave behind a resource that talks about the different algorithms for sure. Amazing. So I don't know if you guys all have time to post every day, but if you don't, that's okay. Sometimes it's more important to focus on building like a regular, consistent cadence. And if we were to look at the screen and see these 2 examples, my green calendar has, its posts evenly and consistently spread out, whereas my red calendar got a little excited and posted every day for the week, and then ran out of steam and then post for a long period of time. Now, both of these examples actually posted 12 times in a month. So technically it added up to like 3 times per week, but one account had higher followers and engagement. I will leave it up to you to guess which one. It's the green one. So my advice is to just like pace yourself, aim for at least maybe 2 posts per week, and then build from there. So how do we make your posts findable? How do people find your content? Well, most times new followers come from, they're prompted through like an email or a website or like an aligned social media platform. Maybe you have like a sister non-for-profit, or you work with brands or influencers, what have you, and they're exposed to it that way. Or they discover your content through hashtags. And so this is why hashtags are important, because it makes your content like searchable. So I can look up economic injustice, hashtag economic injustice, and I should be able to see all the people who mention this topic, be it non-for-profit, be it brands, be it individuals. And when I see somebody who I'm like, oh, that is a good take, I will follow that account. And then lastly, when it's shared with them through a friend. And so that's why it's important to include a call to action so that the party knows what they should be doing. Should I be sharing this content? And I think a big reason that people want to follow you is because of your content, of course. So it's important to find like a balance between or in the content mix that makes your audience happy. And most organizations that I work with use this kind of, they split their content up into these 4 categories: educate, entertain, inspire, and promote. And educate generally means like you're trying to spark somebody's curiosity. You're trying to add to somebody's knowledge bank. And you can do this through like tips, FAQs, did you knows. Then entertaining content it's intriguing. It keeps the audience engaged. It's people are interested in what's coming next, and it doesn't always have to be funny. People often confuse the two, that entertaining means it's funny, but it could just be stories that you're telling, and before and afters. People love that. Inspiring content. This is like when you have like a positive, a memorable message. It's a message that will stick in the minds of your viewers, and it's meant to drive them to keep going and tackle a problem. And it's you usually tell it with people-focused stories. And then lastly, promotional content. Self-explanatory, but it's like when you're encouraging your audience to take the next step, whether that's donating clothes, money, what have you. Volunteering, maybe you have like a micro volunteering platform that you want people to take a look at. You just tell them what they need to be doing. And then, once you've decided what your content should do, the next question is, well, how should it be organized? And so you should be looking into identifying content themes that will help you organize your posts. And whether that's like, maybe we want to speak a little bit about current events, maybe we want to highlight our communities and partnerships in one content theme. It's up to you. And then finally, we want to decipher, okay, what is the best vehicle in which to deliver this message? So what is the best platform or the best post type to use? So, in this case, we might decide, okay, well, we're going the IG route and we are going to do Instagram like live or stories. And the aim is for you to use different content combinations to tell the best story or the best rhetoric. So you might say, well, I want to educate people on why the systems that, or the system and the powers that be have made it such that, the poor get poorer and the rich get richer. And we want to talk about it in relation to a current event that just happened. And we might use like a multi-image post or a carousel in order to deliver that message. And then, hopefully we'll gain traction that way. Do you guys have any questions on that? Oh, just a comment. Excellent. So I want to end things on like an aspirational note. So a lesson from our peers. So I'm going to talk about the 5 best practices that we see from other social justice organizations. We're starting with numero uno, coordinating community responses. So the aim of the game here is everybody should know the terms and conditions for getting involved. Your audience should know exactly what they should do, why, for what cause. And one of the organizations that did this masterfully was the ALS Association. Do you remember that challenge in 2014 where people would dump a bucket of ice water over your own head or somebody else's head? And the aim was to promote awareness of ALS and to encourage donations to ALS research. Of course, the challenge went viral on social, in part due to like the nomination system that it had. So once a person had completed a challenge, then you're supposed to nominate other people to complete it as well. And if they chose not to do it, or they didn't complete it within like a certain time frame, I think it's like 24 hours or something, maybe I'm mistaken, but then they would have to forfeit by way of like charitable donation. So the success of this challenge, I think, was aided by it didn't really take much to participate. It was a really low barrier to participation. And it had like a lot of entertainment value, and there were a lot of celebrities that participated. In the end, there were 2.4 million like tagged videos that were circulating Facebook alone. And there was $115 million worth of donations. And so, of course, that donation amount was able to like completely transform the association, and it was able to like invest in research and assistive technologies, and increase like the access to healthcare and services for people with ALS. So that's probably the best like story that I have with how you should be coordinating community responses. The second is platforming lived experiences. So I think many social justice causes work for like building equality for minorities and underrepresented like individuals. And the stories of these people are not well known or publicized. And social is a great place that you can be amplifying those voices to potentially millions of people around the world. And then this exposure to to share these shared like life experiences about racial violence or sexual harassment and other form of oppressions directly from the underrepresented. And an example that comes to mind is the Me Too movement, of course. So this was like a source of solidarity for women from all backgrounds who have experienced sexual harassment. And it focused on the experiences of sexual violence survivors from all walks of life. And they told stories and they shared experiences and of these women. And they just hoped to convey how popular or common sexual harassment was. And I think at the end of it, they actually succeeded in reducing the tolerance for abusive behaviors, and they increased support for victims. So that's just about platforming lived experiences. The second or the third best practice that I want to highlight is promote and planning events. So Occupy Wall Street is just like a great example of a grassroots political movement. It's like, you know, action from the power of the masses, that sort of thing, you know? And the Occupy movement operated from like a bottom level organization. Like they didn't really have like an official leader. And so they had like, they just had a couple of groups that decided that they were going to organize a protest here, protest there, protest there. And it spanned multiple weeks, and it made splashes internationally, and they had used social media to like mobilize and in some cases radicalize audiences. Yeah, and so organizing in-person events is a great way to get traction on your movement. I'm having a little bit of a technical difficulty. Oh, no. Okay, amazing. So my fourth point is signal boosting. I know. This is a little bit controversial, but I'm still going to talk about it because I think there's some lessons here. So signal boosting, you know, social provides the opportunity for people, for like the voice of an individual to be amplified, but that can be lost in the noise of the internet. And sometimes it takes a community using that share feature to gain traction. And so the process of signal boosting is when a fellow social media user, or all of them, social media users, share a single message, and it can cause the content to go viral. I don't know who here has seen this particular content that I have on my screen right now on their social in the last couple of days. Have you seen it? I'm curious. And regardless of where your politics lie, there are lessons to be learned from the Free Palestine movement as it relates to how they've handled social media. They understood the resistance areas of their target audience, the areas that confuse the audience, and they addressed it in their messaging. And I think when you add to that, like the digestible medium that people can just share with their followers, and you can understand why this meme is going viral. And I honestly don't think that people appreciate how amazing what the Free Palestine movement is doing in real time. Like, what we're witnessing is the shifting of what is called the Overton window. And it's a term used to describe like the range of subjects that mainstream media deems publicly acceptable to discuss. So I think social media outlets have really empowered people to express themselves and find others that share their views and band together to break the mainstream. And by promoting the spread of unconventional knowledge, i.e. the meme that we just spoke about, individuals feel like emboldened to promote unlikely arguments. I'll say that. And my last tip is to partner with brands and influencers. It is not just individuals that are expected to be participating in these social discussions. In fact, 70% of consumers think that it is important for brands to take a stand on social issues. And I just thought that was the most interesting thing. But, when brands do join the conversation, they oftentimes miss the mark, as we've come to see. And, while presumably well-meaning, I don't know if you guys remember this boilerplate that was, going around after in June 2020. And it was basically just like, we at Brand are committed to fighting injustice by posting images to Twitter that talk about our commitment to fighting injustice. And that's it. That's all we're going to be doing. Thank you so much for coming to our TED Talk. And I just thought that was so funny and so true. Anyways, enter Aurora James, who saw the messaging from these brands in 2020 and decided that she's going to start this thing called the 15% Pledge, which is a US-based non-for-profit organization, nonprofit rather, sorry. And she said that, she was watching Black-owned business literally just shut their doors before her eyes. And all while she was hearing these major retailers say, we stand with you, we're your friends. But she said, in reality, they actually didn't, because they weren't making any kind of tangible change. So this was born out of, multiple acts of social injustice and like police brutality. Yeah, sure. But also it was born out of like the lack of corporate accountability for systemic issues at play. And so this particular movement, the 15% Pledge, is calling on like major retailers to dedicate 15% of their inventory space to Black-owned businesses. And the rationale here is, how can Black people account for 15% of the population in the United States, but Black-owned brands only hold 1% of the shelf space? This do not sound, the math is just not mathing. So Old Navy, Sephora, Gap, Macy's, and West Elm are just some brands who've taken the pledge. And I think we've covered a lot today. We've talked about how genuine social media activism is usually supported by like concrete actions, donations, and measurable commitments to change. We spoke about the fact that small online action can ease people into more costly offline action. And we spoke about how posting consistently and making your content findable is gonna grow your followers. And did I miss anything? I'd love to know what you guys learned from today's session. No? Okay. Well, if you don't have any learnings to share, I would love to know if you have any questions.
I have one question. So how would you suggest looking at insights and trying to, adjust them to meet the organization goals?
Right. So when I talk about defining KPIs, the first thing that we need to do is define the organization goals. And then we need to see what social media KPIs would align to that. I think oftentimes we get bogged down by the lists that are around the internet that say like 48 social media KPIs to track right now, when that's not really the case. It should be on a case-by-case basis. And so you would have to like really examine what you're trying to do as an organization and then go from there. So if you're, let's say, for example, that I'm, a fashion brand and I want to increase traffic to my e-commerce website. Well, then at that point, my main metric would be, who came from social to my e-commerce website, rather than like variance metrics like likes and clicks and that sort of thing,
Someone asked if the recording of this will be available or the slides.
I could definitely make the slides available, no problem.
Yeah, and we'll record we'll take the recording and put it up on YouTube today, so we'll have that for everybody.
And Tony Choop asks about your take on sub-brands for specific campaigns run by a nonprofit advocacy agency. Like, what's your specific take on that?
Sub-brands for specific campaigns. I'm not sure I understand. What is? Can you explain a little bit more in depth what you mean by that question? Or meaning, should it all be run on your main platform? Interesting. Like if you have partnerships with brands or something like that, I would put that on my main page. I think there is definitely a balance between seeming authentic and when you're in a non-for-profit space, that is, I think, priority number one. So you would have to balance that content very delicately, Is public opinion on companies taking a stand on social issues still going up? I would say it's still the same, yes. People seem to really be looking carefully at companies that are, putting profit before people. And, amongst millennials and Gen Zers, we are what you call conscious consumers, which means that we want the companies that we support to in turn support our values. And so I think that's just going to continue as we, Gen Zers get more buying power. Yeah. So thank you guys for your questions. I know that there's a big fear when it comes to, getting started on social. It's like the fear of, unknowingly making a mistake and making your brand look bad. I think everybody feels that. And I just want to say, like, don't overthink it too much. The only way to do better is just to dive in and really practice. And I promise you, social media has a very short memory. So making mistakes is human, and social is all about just showing that human side.
Tim asks if there are any recommendations for nonprofits who deal with trolls on their social media pages.
That's an interesting question. I think you'd have to come up with like a governance policy as an organization. Some people, they just decide to have like a blanket statement that says, very interesting, thank you so much for your comment. We will, here's a resource that, you know, links or talks about our stances on these issues, or if you wanted to educate yourself on these topics, here, you know, go over here. And some people just delete the comments. It depends on what you want to do.
So I heard to gain more of an audience, a lot of organizations have to use like most of the platform tools. So like for Instagram, they might have to like post in their story, post reels, do IGTVs. Do you have like any more information about that, like increasing engagement?
Okay, so I think, so the way that the algorithm works, it's usually like they take interest into account on Instagram. So basically, the post types that your audience has interacted with in the past, that is the post types that are going to be serving them. So if they have interacted with videos, then they're going to give them videos. If their audience likes reels, that's what they're going to be showing them. So it's very, they're just giving the people what they want. So that's why it's kind of important to like be switching it up and trying to post all different types of post types. And I'll tell you that Instagram stories are seen as more authentic, and Instagram carousels are the most engaged with post type. And this is because the algorithm will serve the carousel twice. It is the only post type that it will do that for. If you have not interacted with a post type on the first serve, it will reserve it to you. And so, you know, when Hootsuite did our own experiment, we saw that we got 3.1 times more engagement and I think 1.4 times more reach when we just did Instagram carousels.
Samantha Martinez asked if organizations should have a dedicated media staff, or is it better to have program people doing that with their experience?
I cannot tell you what you can and cannot afford. So it really depends on the resources that you have. A lot of the more successful companies that we speak to do have dedicated headcount for social media, just because there's so much that goes into it. It really is like a do everything job, from like you're creating the content, you are video producer, editor, you are you know, copywriter, you are analyst, you are so many things. So it really depends on the resources that you have available and what your company is willing to invest in.
She added a follow-up question and asked if there's a roadmap for social media content strategies that you would recommend, or should it be customized by a specific organization?
I would say it would be customized by the specific organization. Yeah.
I also have one more question. So when it comes to hashtags, a lot of organizations aim to use like big common hashtags. Would you recommend using smaller hashtags to get more of an audience, or would you recommend using like big hashtags such as like hashtag nonprofit or hashtag the city, something like that?
So I would not use nonprofit, I don't think, but like I would actually use like a dual pronged approach where, you know, I don't know if you've ever heard about this, but it's like called the long tail strategy, where it's like you have like very niche keywords, but you know, it goes a little bit further, even though like you might not have a lot of people searching for that hashtag. It will certainly, I think, be the most relevant like leads that will be coming into you. And then in terms of volume, you would also probably be well served if you use something like, I don't know, economic injustice or something like that. But I wouldn't go just like straight non-for-profit. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Amazing.
Are there any other questions? Please leave it in the Q&A below.
Yeah, no, Ashley, I wanted to thank you. Like, I just posted an article to some best practices that Ashley posted on Hootsuite about social media activism, and I read that and I said this would be perfect for Boston and for our participants here. And so I reached out to her a couple weeks ago, and I'm so glad that you were able to join us on this. And I think it's a great presentation. Really appreciate it and appreciate your time on this.
Thank you so much. I've been looking forward to coming to speak to you. So thanks for having me.
Yeah. Any final thoughts?
Any final thoughts?
Any final words?
To quote the words of the great philosopher Nike, just do it. Yeah, that's it.
That's great. Well, thanks again, Ashley. And for everybody, we recorded all of this. We'll share it out to everybody, and then we'll share the slides as well, so you'll have all that. And yeah, thank you, Ashley. Appreciate it.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
And up next, I just wanted to quickly tell you that Peace Tech Lab, we've got one more session next week. We'll be sending out the invitation later today, but it's all around digital security, tools for tech tools for liberty, and eyewitness video. So next week we're going to have the ACLU. Kate Crockford is going to be with us talking about the ACLU's Tech for Liberty program. We've got Trey Hanbury from Hogan Lovells that'll be joining us, and he'll be talking about digital security and just the latest threats to yourself, to your organizations, and how to protect yourself. You don't want to miss that, I can tell you that. And it's 4 days from the murder of George Floyd. And so we're going to be doing a special program with Witness, the group that does video monitoring for police brutality, to protect against atrocities around the world. And they're going to be talking about the power of eyewitness video. So that's going to be a great presentation next week at noon, but we'll send you all those invitations. We've got a few minutes. If anybody has any questions, we're going to take a 5-minute break before in just a few minutes, we're going to have one of the world's leading media experts. He's going to be joining us, Stephen Kostet, who's from Boston, graduated from MIT, and is just, he's worked with every organization, large and small, around the world. So he'll be joining us at 10:45. So just take a quick bio break, and then we'll join back up at around 10:45, or sorry, 11:45 Eastern time. Thank you. Hey, Stephen, we're letting everybody get a quick break and then we're going to jump back in.
Okay, is that your slide? And so this is not my slide.
Yeah, did you want me to share or do you want to share the slides?
I'll do it. So let me
Okay.
should we set that up now? So can I share?
Yeah. Let me unshare. When you share, there's a little checkbox for the sound.
Yeah, I'll do that. Yeah, we have a few minutes, so let's get that right.
All right.
Okay, how are you? Let me just get this right. Share. Okay, let me just put share of sound and also optimize video clip too.
Yep.
And then share. And then sharing screen. See. Do you see that?
Yep. And then just go full screen at the bottom and.
Well, you use slideshow. Hold on. How's that?
Perfect.
Okay, great. I'm excited. How's the morning going?
It's great. Yeah, it was fantastic. We had Ashley Reed, who used to be at Hootsuite, talking about social media strategies. And I think you were on a little bit for the Generation Citizen, so like a local organization
really cool.
in Boston.
I know Hootsuite really well. That's really interesting. I wish I know some folks there. That's a great company.
Yeah, our Hogan Levels partner set that up, so that was great. I
Oh,
really,
great.
really
Good.
appreciated that.
Let's see. Okay, let me just make sure. Great. Okay, well, what I do have, if we have a problem, what I think we should do anyway, Tim, is I'll show the video, but why don't we put it in the link as well when we get to that slide? Because you never know what the internet connections are.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll share that.
But that's later on.
Were those the links for those videos? Was it in you sent that as a separate link?
Yeah, I sent it to you in the email.
Okay.
So you have that there. Plus, if you look at the speaker notes on your version, they're in there. And it's just, it's informal. We'll make it work. It's a great group. It's challenging when you're working this way virtually. It's just funny because I just bought tickets